I hear you have a very controversial ranking of the Alien franchise.
Yeah.
And I was hoping you could talk through it briefly.
I love Aliens is like my top pick, but number 2 for me is definitely Alien Resurrection.
Interesting.
I think the people that like downright hate it are just wrong. Like, I wouldn't say that about most movies, because like taste is subjective or whatever. But like, if you don't like Alien Resurrection, you're incorrect.
I saw it as a kid, and I remember thinking it was the coolest thing I had ever seen, particularly the guy with the guns in his sleeves. Like, it looks like an anime. Like, it looks like a live-action anime.
I love, like, any, like, American movie that's, like, made by, like, a French dude, just because, like, I feel like you could really tell, like, he was, like, trying to make, like, a normal action movie, but it's just,
He has the French brain disease, so it didn't really come out right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like how, like, The Fifth Element should be Star Wars, but instead it's like a psychosexual nightmare for much of it.
Exactly.
We're going to be talking about a very kind of pesky conspiracy theory, which is this idea that Tumblr turned an entire generation of people trans. And this idea has been weaponized by the right for years now. And the guy who won the election thought the issue would help his base, Pokemon, go to the polls. But how did this spread? And what did Tumblr actually do to our brains? My name is Ryan Broderick. Welcome to Panic World, a show about the various witch hunts, moral panics, and viral freakouts that bubble up out of the weirdest, most confusing corners of the internet. And today we're going to explore how this conspiracy theory started and what the Tumblr mind virus actually did. Joining us today is Vera Drew, the director of The People's Joker, an incredible movie. I just finished it. It's so good. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I definitely don't claim to be an expert on Tumblr, but I was on it. I am of the generation, and I do have some, like most of my takes. I'm a little bit out of the norm. I'm a little edgy.
You know, I want to get this out of the way first. I'm a massive fan of The People's Joker. It's an incredible film. And one of the things that I thought was like so great about it was, and you can tell me if I sort of misinterpreted it, but the way sort of I was viewing a lot of it was this presentation of, you know, modern identity politics and also like the discovery of your own identity sort of being intertwined with both like mass media and the internet, the cyber war that is sort of referenced throughout the movie. This idea that all these young people are like veterans of the cyber war. And I thought it was very fitting for the theme of this episode, which is this idea of a social experiment of putting an entire generation of people online at once, coming of age, you know, using these platforms. And to start, you know, kind of taking our journey down this road, I would love to hear about sort of the earliest internet communities you were using as a kid growing up, as a teenager.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, part of the reason why I got excited when you asked me to do this was just because, like, there actually were, like, a lot more overt Tumblr jokes in The People's Joker. Like, in an earlier draft, we literally had, like a Tumblr, like a militarized Tumblr army that was like a part of it in some way. We took that out just because it was like maybe distracting from like the main story a little bit, and it's just kind of something that like you kind of implicitly understand what happened. So I'm glad like that you picked up on the like Tumblr and mass media and internet thing, because it means that we wrote it better than our first draft, I think.
Oh, no, yeah.
But to answer your question, sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'm 35. I don't lie about my age because I think that's for pussies. I remember a time before the internet. Like, I remember when we got it in my house. So I was like really kind of at the ground floor of everything. Like, I was on AOL message boards in the early days, and then in AOL Instant Messenger, like that heyday of it, like I was definitely there. And God, what like a dangerous place for like a child to be, like in those early days of the internet. Just like nothing was like you could just instant access to murder and pornography of all varieties. I was always drawn to, I was really into LiveJournal and Zanga. So for me, like when I found Tumblr, it kind of just was like this this like extension of that, I think. Like just this idea that I could kind of just like imprint my personality into like cyberspace.
Yeah. So the way this conversation is framed usually is that queer people didn't exist online until Tumblr, which is incredibly dumb. And we also have pages of proof that that's not true. So one of the things that we wanted to look up, like in doing research for this episode, our researcher Adam, we sent him deep into the history of queer social networks because it's sort of like this lost history of the internet. And so have you ever heard of an AOL chat room called the Gazebo?
I don't think so.
It was started by a trans woman named Gwendolyn Ann Smith, and it launched in 1994. The Gazebo is getting 20,000 visitors a month, which like for then, like the 90s, like that's pretty good. And it got big enough that they were able to put pressure on the AOL CEO, Steve Case, to lift a ban that AOL had on the words transsexual, transvestite, and cross-dressing. And the whole community like petitioned AOL to change how it worked.
Oh, wow.
And so this modern idea that, you know, young people or even just queer people in general have never, you know, are using the internet for the first time is not correct. Like this has been going on for 30, 40 years at this point.
To that point too, like, I mean, it's just like, it's the only place where like queerness could exist. I mean, like for me, like I remember like prior to like having an internet connection, the only times I ever really saw transsexuals or anything like outside of like a false gender binary was like on like Howard Stern or things like Jerry Springer and stuff that was like kind of more in this like freak show aspect, whereas this is like it finally like allowed people to like sort of have a voice. I mean, not to inject like a new conspiracy theory into the conversation, but like I think that's like probably why like the internet is definitely like some sort of psyop from like the CIA, just because like from its inception you were throwing all these like different niche groups that like are at odds with each other, like from marginalized communities and you just hateful trolls and stuff. Like it just really you can really point to that as like when society started falling apart is when we all just started having instant access to each other's thoughts.
Well, it's funny you say that because like we were digging back through some of these older queer spaces that are sort of they either now exist as screenshots or like broken internet archive caches. And I wanted to have you describe one that we found that we thought was pretty sick actually. So here there's a chat on the right side of the screen. It'll say studio chat.
Oh my god, okay, so it's Techno Dyke headquarters. I definitely visited this.
Really?
This is
That's amazing.
Techno Dyke headquarters. Oh my god, and there's like a Sinead O'Connor like ad on the side.
It's so good.
The gathering place for web savvy dykes, for the web savvy dyke, Techno Dyke headquarters. I just like miss this like color palette too, just like how every single color is used in this era of the internet.
Yes, they're stretching HTML's color capability all the way. Like this is all everything you could do with a screen in 1994 or whatever. Yeah,
there's an advice corner. There's like book recommendations, like a chat room, like links. Like this is just so much better than the social media we have now. Like I'm sorry to be old.
No, you're right. There's like an earnestness to this era of the web, particularly when we're talking about like subcultural spaces where people are, the way I sort of view it is like the excitement of being able to connect with people without sort of a mass media filter for the first time. When you look at these websites from the late 90s, like there's like a joy that you just don't see on the internet anymore. Like you just don't see Gen Z being like, I'm excited to meet fellow people. Like the Chapel Roan TikTok comment sections are not like this. They're very different.
No. There's no external like ad forces that are at play here. Like there are like, you know, there's Sinead O'Connor and like Indigo Girls pop-up ads attached to it, but that definitely like came from the webmaster. That's not like coming from some like oligarch who lives in Dubai that made this site.
Have you spotted the poll at the bottom? Because I think this is really cute where like it's clearly like a web one kind of click poll, and it's Would you say you're a jealous lover? And then the options are that song, I'll Be Watching You, I wrote it. I'm a little possessive, but I think that's okay. I have trust issues, but I'm getting over it. And nah, I'm pretty laid back and trusting. That's a good poll. That's good.
There's literally like a dating section too. Tired of solitaire? Find your girl. She's waiting. I love it.
This website was launched in like 98, we want to say. By 99, LGBT spaces online, AOL chat rooms, websites, web rings were causing genuine real life controversies, which is kind of fun, actually. We found this one story of a U.S. naval officer named Timothy McVeigh, who is not that Timothy McVeigh, but just like another guy with that name. And he was discharged from the Navy for being gay because he was on a nuclear submarine posting in gay AOL chat rooms, which just goes so hard. It just, that rules.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you should be using the internet on a nuclear sub for.
Yeah. And then a year later, AOL gets in trouble with like this massive community that they've built because they banned a user for calling himself a submissive bottom. And AOL like didn't like that that's what someone was saying. The Gazebo, they meet with GLAAD and Planet Out and AOL. Everyone comes together. AOL sort of agrees that like they will host queer spaces in these chat rooms and they'll let people use them. And then Gwendolyn Ann Smith, who launched the Gazebo, ends up organizing the first ever Trans Day of Remembrance, which like sort of speaks to like how big these spaces were getting by the late 90s. Were you using any kind of pre-social media spaces specifically for queer people, or was in that era where you just sort of like jumping around the internet? Was there any sort of anything like this that you were ever on?
I mean, yeah, like I definitely remember at least seeing Techno Dyke. I also like, for me, I was so closeted. I grew up in the Midwest in the 90s, so like I was just it's why like I always bring up like Howard Stern and like Jerry Springer, because like I was obsessed with those things too. Like I would watch them. It wasn't necessarily titillating. It was just like I felt represented, just like a window into like possibility. It's such a unfortunate way that like Lana Wachowski's was like sort of outed before she ever like came out. But I remember like finding out about that in like an AOL chat room, and like it basically being like, oh my god, like the director of my favorite like fucking movie is this. And then like you didn't hear anything about it for years after that. Like it was basically kind of like scrubbed from the internet. So like it was just this like access point for me to like any kind of queer identity, but I think it was still something that was just so outside of me. Like I didn't have like any sense that like I was that. I was just like drawn to these things. And because then there was also just like I remember frequenting this amputee fetish message board. And
okay,
like
I'm locked in. Tell me more. Okay. Yeah.
Like, and it was weird because it's like it's not necessarily like, oh, like I have like as like a teen had like a fetish for amputees or anything. Like I definitely remember seeing like very beautiful people with missing limbs on there and stuff, but it was just this like, for me, just this window into things that were not fucking like Midwestern farmers and the like annoying jocks that I was surrounded by. And I think it created like a level of empathy in me too, that it was like I not only like, years later was able to like finally come out and start realizing that I was trans and stuff, but like it just showed me that there were other kinds of people out there besides, like Catholics.
Right. Which is important. You have to meet people who aren't Catholic. I've been trying to do that my entire life. I had a similar experience actually, but it wasn't amputees. It was like an artist on DeviantArt that was drawing like very erotic comics of like women being eaten by giant frogs. And I feel like I was like on
wow.
4chan. Yeah, I feel like I was like on 4chan as a teenager and like clicked a link, and it's just like this guy's like completely deranged, very hyper specific fetish comic that he'd been doing for years. And I was like, oh, the world's a big place. Okay, yeah, there are lots of people in the world. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a like. I'm enjoying this conversation so much just because, like, I think about how many times in the last couple of years I've said that the internet, like, ruined the world. But like, it really does. It was there's like a softening, I think, that it sounds like both of us experienced.
There is a softening. I think that's true. And so, I mean, to kind of jump back to the topic du jour with Tumblr and the cognito hazard that it sort of unleashed on the internet, Tumblr launches in 2007. It's very popular, like especially with teenagers. I probably got an account like 2008, I want to say. But this is really interesting. We found this PhD researcher, Dr. Oliver Hameson, teaches at University of Michigan. And in a paper in 2019, he called Tumblr an inherently trans technology. Do you have any guesses as to what that would mean or how that was defined? Because this is fascinating, but I'm curious, like what your take is on that.
I guess because there's a level of anonymity to it. Like I remember like my first Tumblr was I think I was like about 16 or 17, so this would have been the early days, like 2007, 2006 or whatever. Like I remember having an Avi that was like Barbarella, and
cool.
like kind of just being like I don't know why this is my Avi, but like I just like Barbarella, and I just the fact that you were kind of able to have this like expression be the first thing that people see. I don't know, something like that. Did I articulate that at all?
No, you nailed like half of this. So basically, Hameson defined it the reasons why basically as so reblogging allowed users to share ideas with and without commentary. So you could basically amplify different subcultures really easily. This idea called vortextuality, which is you see a post on Tumblr and it makes you want to go investigate like where that came from. Who is that person? What are they aligned with? Anonymity, but also pseudonymity. So the idea that you can change your identity, you can have multiple blogs, you can experiment with your identity that way. And then a bunch of the sort of infrastructure of the site. So like tagging, a limited comment section. So you kind of have to post to communicate. You can't just fill up a comment section. And then it also allowed not safe for work content. Well, at least it did for a while.
Yeah. Back in the day.
So, you throw all that together and you end up getting this very expressive social network at a time where, this was the MySpace era still. This was not a time where people were using sophisticated technology. So Tumblr was kind of it. You're 30, I'm 34, you're 35. So did you get it in college basically? Was that kind of when you got an account?
Now that I'm realizing that the experience I described with the Barbarella picture was Zanga. I don't think I had Tumblr until college because I saw its potential for posting video and short form art content. Because this was still, YouTube had been around at this point, but it was still early enough to where it didn't really function that well, in my opinion, as a social media experience as much. So I remember, I think it probably would have been my freshman year of college, and kind of centered around just curation. And I always really loved just having the ability to, and I don't know why, because I would never do this now. I journal every single day, every morning I wake up and journal, but I liked having public space where I could kind of just emotionally process what I was going through. So I think I was definitely using it for that in those early days too.
Yeah, I was a compulsive live blogger. I would just watch a bad movie and then post 30 times in a row about whatever movie I was watching on Tumblr to nobody. And it just felt good. I don't know why it felt good, but it did. You sort of talked about the internet as a window into sort of different paths and different identities. And it links really well to this quote from a 2018 piece we found on them.com by Serena Daniari, who wrote, it was while scrolling through Tumblr that I first saw trans bodies actually being celebrated instead of being degraded. Kind of ties to your idea of sort of this, the mass media depiction on the Jerry Springer stuff. And so she writes, I was finally able to see women with penises, men with vaginas, and non-binary people of all body types. I realized that I wasn't alone. There were others like me out there, and we were all beautiful, unique, and valid, a powerful epiphany for a young trans person. The unfortunate reality is that out of the many communities affected by Tumblr's porn ban, queer content creators will bear the brunt of the damage. This was written like right after the ban, where, you know, it's a very complicated thing to, I think, articulate, this idea that like to have this sort of not safe for work, fairly renegade social space does allow people to communicate in a way that they just can't on something like Instagram. Like you just can't Tumblr post on Instagram. It's not possible.
And look, like this is kind of a minefield that I'm walking through by saying this, but like I think that's what's missing now from the internet is the like dangerous aspects of it. You know, the fact that like as a kid and a young adult, like it was a lot easier to like just be looking through like anime like GIFs in Tumblr, and then suddenly you'd be like staring at girl dick, and like that was
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know that I would be here if I didn't have like those kinds of experiences. I mean, like I guess like transness is more and queerness in general and queer bodies and stuff, it's more normalized now, so like you don't need that as much, but I do think there's like that's probably more so where this like a lot of these bands came from, you know, on Tumblr, and like kind of just like how much pornography is shadow banned on sites like Twitter and stuff now as well. Like I think it is to kind of like detrans the youth, if anything.
I think you're right, and this is a thing that I've had trouble over the years articulating as well, which is that, you know, to tie a thread going all the way from the gazebo and techno dyke to Tumblr, pre-porn ban, there was this sort of like, we're off in the corner, we're doing our own thing, like give us the space, give us the tools, and like we'll live our lives and we'll communicate and it'll be fine. And then in the 2010s, as the internet is becoming more corporatized and America is becoming more politically polarized, you see this thing where porn bans, sort of algorithmic filtering, it's all coming in. And as it's coming in, the right wing is becoming much louder. And I think they are connected. Like, I do think that when you sort of pave the Wild West a bit, it allows like really loud fascist psychos to become a lot more powerful because the subcultural spaces are going away. It's like the same idea of like Nazis in your punk bar. Like eventually, like it just becomes really hard to communicate, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I got off of the internet pretty much entirely right around like 2016 to 2018 that I stopped using the internet because I feel like the thing you were describing kind of reached this boiling point where I just remember feeling a lot of fear about like being queer in any online space. It wasn't even necessarily motivated by just like getting hate from like alt-right people or anything like that. It was kind of like the reactionary aspects of the queer community in those spaces too, like and kind of some of the self-policing that was going on, and around the time that I was starting to like come out and be more visibly queer, and I just didn't want that negativity and shit to be a part of my brain. Like I didn't want whatever like kind of gender identity and queer expression that I was sort of brewing to be sort of stuck in this echo chamber that was rapidly shrinking too. But it did feel like there was a monolithic trans and queer culture like at that point to me, like at least just like coming into my own queerness, that like I was Like, I gotta, like, figure out who I am separate from the internet, because this is just gonna make it confusing. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
I think it makes total sense. You even sort of touch on this in People's Joker, this sort of like euphoric feeling of like identity anarchy that like was, I think, very, very present on the internet, where, you know, you go into like it still is present if like you go into like a furry Discord, but like, you know, this idea that you can be whoever you want to be, do whatever you want to be, you know, that feeling was going away, especially in public social networks. And what replaced it was, authoritarian, depending on like how you want to define the politics of it, but it was inherently, I think, authoritarian. And we're going to talk about how that was co-opted by the right in particular, and how they whipped up a right-wing moral panic. And we're going to do all of that right after the break. When was the first time that you became aware of the idea that the internet was turning teenagers trans? Like, when did you first hear this idea?
God, I mean, like, it's so blurry for me, because like I actually remember even in the early days of Tumblr, somebody I was dating, and she was almost talking about it in a tone positive way, but it was a very like flawed, maybe like an ally trying too hard description of what the internet could be as a safe space. And like I think that also like was the first time that I really that I had probably ever heard transgender instead of like transsexual. So yeah, I'd say like even before like the kind of the sort of algorithmic restriction stuff that you were talking about, like probably like 2008. And you know, like I think so much of my queer identity, I mean, sorry to just keep bringing up Catholicism, but like it was just such my shame. I wanted to really process this when we were making the People's Joker. Like, I had like a level of conservatism that I needed to overcome, like to get to a place where I could express myself that was really just motivated by like shame and fear and like just weird. Like, my parents are liberal, like they're relative, but like very liberal, you know, like they love the police.
Yeah. Well, the police are great. They're great. Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, no, they're great. I think like, especially like when it comes to internet culture and stuff, like I probably even thought to some degree that spaces like Tumblr were not necessarily making people trans, but like the echo chamber of it was just kind of creating this like monolithic identity. Like, I feel like that kept me in the closet for a very long time too. And you know, that the reason the Joker, the Harlequin, is like in the People's Joker is like watching Alex Jones all the time is because that's what I was doing. Like, I wasn't watching it because like I was watching it because he hated the police in those days and was very, he was the first person I think I ever remembered like hearing talking about 9/11 in an actually like reasonable way, where it was like, why aren't we like asking questions about this? And I don't know, like, I mean, that's just all to say, like, I think there's such a thin line between like toxic transphobic incels and self-hating trans women that like I think all of this is, for me, kind of orbits around.
I would say that's correct. I mean, like, so growing up in Massachusetts, I was like I was part of like a DIY punk and emo ska community of bands and stuff. And I remember around 2007, 2008, some of the guys that I would be playing music with, like, becoming curious about like a Republican candidate named Ron Paul, who had some real interesting ideas about politics.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of watching those guys tread this like irony line that, like, you know, a couple of our friendships ended because like they were like just they were just full on Nazis after a while, but like in a funny way, guy. Like it's funny. Like don't worry, it's like, but
Right.
it's not right. But that thin line, I think, is present for anyone who's like been in a subculture, been in a marginalized community, been in a thing that is not inherently mainstream, because it's very easy, very seductive, I think. When we started doing research about how this sort of trans social contagion idea was spreading online, writer and activist Julia Serrano did an incredible job piecing together a timeline of how this all spread. So have you ever heard of a website called The Fourth Wave Now?
No.
So the fourth wave in the name refers to fourth wave feminism, which kind of aligns it with the different waves of revolutionary feminist theory. And this one is a RadFem blog. So RadFem stands for Radical Feminist. It's a whole set of sort of ideas about what feminism should accomplish. And it came up with this idea of Tumblr specifically turning people trans in a blog post called It Ain't a Liberation Movement, which they published in 2015. And in 2016, fourthwavenow.com does another post titled Tumblr Snags Another Girl, but Her Therapist Mom Knows a Thing or Two About Social Contagion. And this is when you start to see the sort of like detransition weirdos who are like, my daughter went on Tumblr and now she thinks she's a boy, but we gotta but now she feels better now. It's all good.
Yeah.
And you know, it is so fascinating to me though that like, you know, I'm sure many of the people who are reading this fourth wave, quote unquote, feminist blog, like see themselves as political revolutionaries on the left, on the liberal side. And they don't really sort of understand that like they are pursuing an inherently conservative, inherently authoritarian idea, at least as far as I believe.
Oh, sure. From my vantage point, it comes from, and I mean, there's nothing more internet than just not having a context for like history and like the history of like queer liberation and feminism and stuff. It's like transness and gender queerness was inherent to the queer revolution and like suffrage, you know, before that too. Like, I mean, you could go even further back to just the fucking, you know, 1800s and, you know, so-called husband wives on the western frontier, and like women who really were men for all intents and purposes getting jobs in coal mines and on the railroads and stuff. Like that is like, I'm not like one of those trans people that's like we're God's gift to humanity, but like there are these very clear lines where like radical politics and especially like of like the, you know, like that lead to other marginalized groups getting more rights, whether it's gay men or lesbians or just cis women being able to have the same jobs or vote, you know, like men do. Transness is always kind of at the forefront of that in some way.
Sure.
The thing you're describing could only exist on the internet, in a space where you can completely remove any historical context and somehow paint this picture that transness or queerness is somehow the thing that we need to be getting radical against. It's so it breaks my brain, but I understand why it's allowed to function in a space where, you know, you can really curate information in this sort of completely false way.
Yeah, I wanted to read you an excerpt from this post about Tumblr snagging a girl because it is fascinating, because it almost, so that you have a scene in The People's Joker that is shockingly similar, actually, but from this is from the mom's point of view. So here's and also the first line of this is so just like telling and so like perfectly internet brained. So it reads. There's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where the crew is introduced to a mysterious alien video game. It slowly infiltrates the minds of the crew. As we suspected, the game is really an insidious mind-controlling apparatus that will allow an alien race to gain control of the ship. That is what this trans madness feels like to me. The alien mind control device made its way into my home about 2 years ago when my then 11-year-old daughter begged me for a Tumblr account since her friends all had one. Foolishly, I consented without looking into it further. I wish I hadn't. I have decided that the cult indoctrinators have had free access to her beautiful 13-year-old brain for 2 years now, and that it is time that I intervene and fight for my daughter. Lady, it's Tumblr. Like, she's looking at Doctor...
Yeah.
Like, first of all, I'm sorry. He is looking at Doctor Who gifts. That's what's going on right now. He's watching Supernatural. Like, come on.
Yeah. I'm almost sympathetic to it because it's so, like, it's naive. Like, that kind of transphobia is just like, do you hear yourself? Like, and that parent specifically, it's like, do you remember how your parents, like, talked about fucking Elvis and, like, just moving his hips on the Ed Sullivan show? Like, you're basically doing that. Like, you're doing that on this even dumber level. And, like, it sounds like a fucking sci-fi thing. Like, it's so, and I don't know, it completely, it's, I think what makes me sad about it is, it completely removes the idea that, like, your child is now comfortable exploring these things that were always there.
Right.
They weren't created by the thing. And to me, it's like, you know, because when you asked me to do this, I think I came back and I was like, well, you know, I kind of do think Tumblr made some of us trans, but, like, it is kind of coming from that place. It's like, if I hadn't been of the generation that, like, you know, grew up with the internet, like, in that specific, like, I would have just been, like, fucking Andy Warhol or something. Like, I would have been like that type of gay guy, because I had no representation at all. I could only possibly find it in that kind of, like, beautiful safe space. It's so tragic.
It is. And, like, watching this giant sort of, like, media and academic apparatus spring up in the late 2010s around this idea of the social contagion, and specifically, like, trying to find these, like, detransition stories to prove that it exists, and all of this stuff. We wanted to try to figure out, like, when did it flip? Like, when did it become this thing that wasn't just for weirdos to obsess about online? Do you remember the 2017 piece in The Stranger about detransitioners? Did you ever hear about this?
That's vaguely ringing a bell.
So that was sort of the big crossover point, because once The Stranger, which is like this, you know, this bastion of progressive thought, says, like, hey, maybe this trans thing is, like, a little wacky, huh? Everyone falls in line immediately, because, like, the next year you get this massive piece in The Atlantic called When a Child Says She's Trans. You get it right after that. You have the rapid onset gender dysphoria stuff coming out in academic journals. You have this entire panic. And if you dig into any of these things, you find faulty data. And oftentimes you just find, like, anecdotal stories about parents being like, I don't know what my child's doing on the internet. And I think that's, like, what's happening here. I think the internet has made my child different somehow.
I remember, I think this was around the same time. I believe it was Jezebel had an article about Sophie and how she was
the producer
appropriating. Yeah, the music producer was like culturally appropriating femininity, because I feel like that also coincided with this kind of conversation where it was like transness is basically woman face or whatever.
Right.
And that, like, I'm pretty sure that was Jezebel, and, like, that was a specifically feminist, quote unquote feminist take on it. Like, it's
During this time period, I was working in London, Turf Island, and it was are you ever heard of the forum Mumsnet? Do you know about Mumsnet? If not, I'm very excited to tell you about Mumsnet.
Yes, but please talk about it.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not know what Mumsnet is, it is essentially Reddit for British mums. I use it often to help me navigate British appliances, which are kind of confusing. And during this period of time, Mumsnet was being infiltrated by these people. So it was all of these sort of British stay-at-home moms online all day talking about different washer and dryers and how to use them, and also complaining about their children becoming trans because of the internet. And it was kind of strange, though, to be working in British media at the time, because it was like this weird thing where the line was just sort of coming down from the ether to be like a little more skeptical than we used to be about this whole trans thing. And it did sort of feel like, it felt like that was the social contagion. Like, it felt like your boss would all of a sudden walk in one day and just be like, I think we gotta shine a light on this whole thing, that, this is kind of crazy, huh? And it started building over time in a way that actually creeped me out. I was deeply unsettled by how quickly the tide shifted over there during this exact period of time.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, pretty on a personal level, pretty unfortunate for me, because it was like right when I was starting to come out to my family and stuff, and it had really kind of like I remember when I came out to my dad as trans, he said something. He was like, yeah, like, I don't think that was a thing until like this past year. Like, right? Like, I've never heard of this before.
Right.
Like, this is like a trend that's going on, right? And like, and it was like crazy hearing him say that too, because I remember growing up, again, like a good Clinton liberal he was, like, how often he'd talk about the conspiracy theory that Ann Coulter was a transsexual woman. And like,
I forgot about that. That was a big thing.
Really became,
yeah.
For me, it's why I like brought up the Sophie thing, because I think that's like maybe part of where it spread like wildfire.
Hey, this is Grant, producer of the podcast. So we wanted to make sure we got this right. So we think Vera was actually referencing a controversial Fader piece from 2014, not a Jezebel story. That's it. Back to the episode.
Again, another minefield I'm probably like sort of walking through here, but whatever. Like,
let's get
I think
into
like
it.
when people realized the distinctions between transsexuals and transgender people and non-binary identities, there was this almost like thing where it was like, oh, well, I know what people who have like a quote-unquote sex change operation is, okay? I understand that. But this whole Tumblr thing, that's different, and it's fake. It's just a trend. Right. Like, that was the kind of shift, and to be coming out and to have, I have so many friends that were also, around this same era, to be coming out during that era as a, I was in my late 20s, did not pass on any level and had really no interest or ability to either. It made transition very hard, especially like, and the reason it's like I qualify all that with like, this is a minefield I'm walking through, is like there is a conversation. When you start having that conversation, it can go down this path where it's like, I don't think there needs to be any distinction between all those identities. Like, I think anybody who has like a marginalized gender identity, whether they choose to medically transition or not, or like they're changing their presentation, or they're just changing their fucking pronouns, like, we all deserve rights and we all deserve love and shouldn't be killed or bullied or whatever. But I think that's what a lot of this comes down to too, is like, it's thought of, it's when people realize that like, that queerness also involves aesthetics and that it's expression, and it's not just, medically changing our bodies. And for like a lot of trans people too, it's like, there's not, for myself, personally, like, I don't think of my experience as a woman as identical to cis women, like, I'm having my own gender experience. So like, I think like that was all nuance that they were not prepared for, especially on in the UK. I mean, like, I just don't think that was. Yeah.
I also think boomers are like obsessed with the idea of like things you do as a kid being trends or fads. I think it's like shared guilt for electing Ronald Reagan and like being hippies and then going from hippies to that. And so now they just sort of project being like, whatever you do before 30, like it does, like that's not real. Like that doesn't matter because we sold out. So like, of course you're going to. And it's like, but we can't because the internet has given us a very different world to live in. And we're going to talk about the realities of that sick, sad world right after the break. You sort of touched on this idea that you took a break from the internet during a fairly boring couple of years in American politics. Like not much happened between 2016 and 2018. Yeah. So you didn't miss much. But what was it like coming back online? You're now, I assume, out of the closet at this point. You sort of have this new full identity. The internet is different. The country is different. Like, what was that moment like? Because I think that's a really fascinating idea to sort of miss those two specific years.
Well, I came back because I had made all this content with Tim and Eric that like we'd done for adultswim.com. Like I'd made a couple like web series for them. There was like a doctor advice type show called Our Bodies that we had done, and then a talk show with David Liebehart, a game show, and then this like kind of like liquid television style remix show called Scum. And we were like, we were starting to launch all that stuff, and it just was not getting any clicks, partially because Adult Swim never promotes anything, and I think Tim and Eric, they're both creatures of the internet, but definitely more from this like Gen X perspective. They were kind of like, how do we get this stuff out there? And like it kind of occurred to me, it was the first moment I remember thinking like, oh, I am invisible as an artist because I don't have any kind of internet footprint. So that was what like got me back out there. And I was about a year into my transition, and I think like it was a real gift that I'd given myself, because I wouldn't say that my personality was fully formed. I think my identity was definitely very fractured, but I had this nice solid foundation that wasn't of what my transness looked like and what my artistic expression looked like without the echo chamber that a lot of other trans people my age had kind of come up in. So I was a little bit more naive, I think. I think it allowed me to be a little bit more fearless in putting myself out there. Like I really I'd never heard the phrase cringe content before, but apparently that's like that's the kind of stuff I was making was this kind of tender queer cringe content. But to me it was just like, I'm being sincere because I came back on the internet and nobody's sincere anymore. It's just all irony poisoning and like anger, and like that's kind of what I'm moving out of because I finally have fucking estrogen in my body. So like it was this real gift. And I remember also just like also feeling a little bit like left behind at the same time. Like I think it was like very hard for me to meet other trans people my age coming back into like online spaces. Like I remember quote unquote discovering Black Dresses, the band. But I like, and like it was so funny because I thought I had stumbled onto this like niche band. It's like, I can't believe it. They're like talking about like dysphoria and like abuse and trauma in this like very hyper specific way. I don't know if they'd like that characterization, but whatever. Like to me, that was like how I was listening to their music. And then I like would go out there and like tweet about it, and everybody be like, yeah, we've been listening to them for like 3 fucking years. You just haven't been online. So there was this like whole just era that I had really missed. but it allowed me to kind of return to this like authenticity that I think I had really kind of ran away from. Like I was before coming out, I was totally irony poisoned. There still was some remaining like kind of fear and shame that I think, especially like once I started making the People's Joker, there's like a sequence 45 minutes into the movie that's this like love scene that's like animated, and it's like really cute. It's really like beautiful, cute animation.
For people who haven't seen it, it's between two Jokers. I should point out it's a beautiful love scene between two Jokers.
Yes.
Two different kinds of Jokers. Yeah.
I was so I always forget that it's a Joker movie. It's
before we lose it, I did want to point out that like the People's Joker is a surprisingly, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I was really taken by how sincere it is as a film, and how it has all of this sort of like cultural ephemera of the irony poisoned world that we live in, but you're dealing with it deeply, sincerely, and very earnestly, and it made me I was very happy. I was like, that is how it is. That's good. Like that's how the world is. It feels like you're bombarded with all this sort of like mass media nonsense, but like you're having real feelings and real lives inside of it. And like I feel like a lot of people kind of lose that when they try to make that kind of stuff. So I was very taken by that. I thought that was pretty cool.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think when people hear about the movie, oftentimes, like, they assume it's just going to kind of be just like a 90-minute shitpost. And, I mean, there's even some people that I think watch it and kind of feel that way just because they don't really resonate with the experience that I'm describing in it. Because it is a pretty specific experience. It is like a... I'm a millennial, but I have noticed that the people who like are usually the trans people that are identifying with the movie more usually are like a little bit younger, like more Zoomers and stuff, which I've always thought was fascinating. Just because I'm like, I have no idea what their experience is, but there's something about it that I guess resonates to them, and maybe there's something that other millennial trans people don't always want to look at in the movie. And I think part of that is the sincerity and the fact that we can kind of bridge these like the shit posting irony thing with like sincerity and kind of sweetness and softness and stuff. And like, I mean, that specific scene, the like love scene between two Jokers, is one that like I was afraid to put in the movie, specifically because it was animated and because it was like kind of like a kid-friendly like love scene, a kid-friendly T for T love scene in a movie. And like I remember having this fear that people would watch it and criticize it as like, I don't know, like grooming or like, because I think people forget how much of like those kind of conversations around art specifically as its potential to groom or like socially condition, it did really come from like other queer people a lot of times. And I think it did kind of come up in these like Tumblr spaces and on 4chan and stuff. So I was like really nervous to like fully lean into that, but that was why I did it. I was like, I need to do the thing I'm afraid of.
We've spent the whole episode sort of talking about the wonders of these spaces, which I'm not going to go back on now. Like I think they were wonderful, but one of the sort of downsides of that kind of openness and anarchy was a lot of blurred boundaries and a lot of sort of like misunderstanding of like how people should behave online. I think a lot of online queer spaces now are having these conversations where they're saying that the way they used to do things was very out of control. This is where you're going to see a lot of arguments about like the proper way to create fan art or write fan fiction or how to be gay at Pride. A lot of these sort of arguments happening from very young queer internet users that might not have the full context to understand that those conversations are helping a very reactionary right-wing movement that wants to shut down the entirety of queer discourse. This sort of idea of the queer Gen Z Puritan is very much a useful idiot for a larger, very, very scary and very, very now powerful anti-LGBT movement in America.
For me, it's just like, it is so clear, and maybe I just have better boundaries than most people online. Like, I know what's appropriate and inappropriate to, like, subject a child to, you know, like, for me, especially, like, I spend half of this episode talking about how, like, at 13, I was, like, on amputee message boards, like fetish message boards.
That's normal 13-year-old stuff. That's normal, though. That's totally fine. That's whatever.
And, like,
I was looking at women getting eaten by frogs. Like, it's fine.
It's not, like, I just don't, I don't want to say, like, we should ever go back to the way things were. Because, like, I saw things on the internet that I wish I had never seen. Like, I really, I can fully say that were things that, like, I would just stumble upon from, like, having LimeWire or whatever. Like, you know,
right.
I'd try to download Team America World Police, and then it would, like, accidentally be this, like, disgusting gangbang. You know, like, it would be stuff like that. Like, I'm not saying we should go back to those days at all, but, there was
a week where I tried to download End of Evangelion on Kaza, and I tried it like 5 times, and every time I downloaded it, I ended up with the same hentai clip of, like, a little Batgirl having sex with somebody. And I was like, how are all of you doing, like, that's multiple users doing the same stupid thing. Like, yeah, the internet was not that fun back then. It was really annoying, actually.
No, it wasn't. And that's not what I think we need to go back to, but it's just, I remember, like when we were making the People's Joker, or specifically when we were writing it, my co-writer Brie LaRose and I were talking a lot about, like, what were the things we watched in that, like, hour and a half after school before our parents came home. And it was, like, Kids in the Hall, like, SNL reruns.
Kids in the Hall on Comedy Central every day. Oh, changed my sense of humor for the rest of my life. Yeah, unbelievable.
And completely, I mean, theoretically completely inappropriate for a child, but, like, harmless at the same time. Like,
totally.
I
Children
think, like,
should not be exposed to Dave Foley. That's not fair to do to a child. They should not know that Canadian alt humor exists. That's not fair.
Exactly. They need that edge, though. Like, it's to me, it's like, that's, if I mean, that's, like, the thing I'm almost kind of, like, maybe like an old lady about. I'm just like, we're softening these kids by sheltering them too much, and making, like, queer art that's, like, so sanitized that there can't be, like, I made the People's Joker for 13-year-olds, like, first and foremost. Like, it is a movie that is supposed to be, like, a rude movie for, like, a teenager to, like, early 20s person who's, like, just starting to discover these things about themselves. And to me, it's like, that can only really be accessed in an authentic way if there's an edginess and a little bit of danger there, which is scary to do as, like, an artist, but it's what I think it's the kind of art that we need. We shouldn't be sanitizing ourselves, because it's not, as you said, it is actually emboldening fascists by doing that, and it's just prolonging like how hard it is to be queer in the Western world.
Tumblr might not be turning teens trans, but the People's Joker will absolutely do it. And I think that's beautiful.
Yes.
I want to thank you for coming on. This was such a good conversation. Do you have anything coming up you want to plug? Anything? Because are you making anything else that you want to talk about? Because, like, I'm such a fan of the People's Joker. It was anyone listening to this, please go watch it. It's on YouTube. You can buy it on every streaming platform. It's great. But yeah, what do you got coming down the pipeline?
Well, right now, the People's Joker, as you thanks for plugging it. It's out there on VOD. You could watch it. You could pay Jeff Bezos to watch the People's Joker if you really wanted to. We also have Blu-rays and DVDs and VHSs available at thepeoplesjoker.com.
Oh, that's sick. That's so sick.
Yeah. People can we've got there's so many special features on the Blu-ray and the DVD. Like I'm another thing that really makes me sound 35 is I really miss director's commentary tracks and special features. So we did a lot of that for the People's Joker. So check that out. And I'm out there on the internet, Vera Drew 22 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I think I have a Tumblr, but I don't really use it that much anymore. And yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to make another movie. We'll see when it comes out. But I'm trying to make a horror movie right now, and I just got a really sick production company on board. So hopefully we'll be getting going on that soon, and I can talk more about it soon. But yeah.
Well, that sounds awesome. Thank you for coming on again. This was great. Panic World is a Garbage Day production. It's written and produced by Grant Irving, hosted by myself, with research from the always fantastic Adam Bumas. A huge thanks to Gabby Cash for designing the incredibly deranged art for this show. And a huge thank you to Kat Rajesk, our lovely video editor. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, you can reach out to Multitude, our wonderful partners, multitude.productions/ads. We have a Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/panicworld. And I'd like to end this episode with an important reminder. Log off and touch grass while you still can. I really appreciated the People's Joker joke about say anything. That micro-targeted me in a way that was almost aggressive, actually. I really enjoyed thinking about singing along to a song about the Holocaust for many years.
Yeah. No,
When
thanks.
That's you. Yeah.
So crazy to think that you could put that on the radio.
Yeah, it was in a Scrubs episode.
Hey, this is Grant, producer of the podcast. Just want to give a special thanks to Julia Serrano, Allegra Rosenberg, Zoe Cable, and Oliver Hampson. All right, we will talk to you very soon. Thank you all so much.